strike up.
Hi, this is James Devine with the Music Ed Podcast. Hey, I'd love to send you my free training, 7 tips to save 5 hours this week and every week. If you'd like to receive that, send me an email at jamesthedivine@gmail.com. Also, if your music event needs professional development or speaker, get in touch with me. I'd love to help out. Enjoy the podcast.
Where you get quick and easy tips on how to be a better band teacher.
This is James Devine with the Music Ed Podcast, and today I have Scott Watson on as a guest, and I know he is going to share lots of great tips and resources with you on how to be a better band teacher. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Hey, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in music. When did you get your start? And maybe a little bit about your early music career.
I think my start is like a lot of band directors, colleagues of mine, at least in the United States, where in fourth grade, growing up in Delaware at the time near Wilmington, we had a chance to choose an instrument, and I chose trumpet, and I thought it was the coolest thing, kind of like Winthrop and the Music Man. I just thought it was the coolest thing to have that shiny Getzen trumpet when I was a kid, and by about sixth grade, I sort of petered out. I stopped practicing very much. The honeymoon was over, and I was ready to quit. Thank God for my mother, who actually said, "Let's get you some private lessons that summer," and it ended up turning me around. Really stuck with it, and ended up, being a somewhat of a standout trumpet player in high school, and went to college thinking I would play professionally. But again. It's really neat how God puts these people in your lives. In this case, it was my private trumpet teacher at the time, Ken Laudermilk, who was teaching at Westchester University. He said, "Why don't you just get a music ed degree? You can practice as hard as all the other people who are performance majors, but then you'll have your music ed degree." So it was wise counsel. So by the time I was a junior, I didn't even want to play for a living anymore. I wanted to be like the next John Williams. I wanted to compose.
Wow!
But I had that. But when I graduated, I'd started, by the time I graduated my undergrad, I had written for every major ensemble at the college I was going to, Westchester University, and got some good performances and was encouraged to go for a master's in composition. And honestly, to pay some bills, I decided I would take a teaching job for a few years just to pay back some student loans. I'd gotten married by that time. And after about 3 years of teaching, I knew that I was an educator first and a composer second. And that's kind of the way I've seen myself for the past 36 years that I've been teaching. So, I'm so glad I had some wise people in my life to point me in the right direction when I was thinking of something that would have kind of been not as prudent.
That's a really cool story. I sometimes share a story about how I almost didn't join band in sixth grade. And now 36 years I've been in this career. And so that's pretty amazing. If you could divide your time, if you could somehow pick your time to divide it between teaching and composing, what would be like your ideal mix?
Well, I don't want to make light of people who have ADHD. I don't know if I actually have it or not, but sometimes I feel like I must have it because I can't concentrate on any one thing. Even if you look at my job, I was a high school band director for a while. Then I became an elementary band director. Then I became, elementary and middle school. Then it was just elementary. Then it was elementary and high school elective music. In other words, in my district, I was fortunate enough that I kept changing jobs to sometimes to meet a personal need. Like to go back to grad school is why I left high school band, or just because I was more interested in certain things. So I mean, I sort of have that option now since I retired in June from my K to 12 gig. I'm teaching as a professor of music in the School of Music at Cairn University, CAIRN, and Cairn is a small Christian liberal arts school outside of Philadelphia. So I'm only on campus 2 days a week, and I feel like I'm self-employed the rest of the week. I teach an online class from home, but I also usually in the morning I'll compose maybe an hour or sketch or just kind of work on creative things for an hour or two in the morning. I usually spend a certain amount of time doing things like social media posts and updating my website. Not a lot of time, but just a little bit of time. So I'm kind of just, planting a seed every day so that I'm keeping that end of what I do up. I create YouTube videos for my YouTube channel, so I'll spend maybe one day a week working on a YouTube video that might not come out for a couple weeks. But I basically am saying I can't. It's hard to say what the division is of time, but I'm glad I'm teaching, and that's probably the most rewarding thing I do. But I love to create, and that's I think why I've written music and created YouTube videos and other things like that. And I've written some. I just feel like being a creator is part of who I am. Honestly, I think it's part of who everybody is. I think we're all very creative in one way or another.
That's pretty awesome. So it sounds like in a lot of ways you are getting to do your ideal schedule. It sounds like I might be a few years behind you. I kind of got into teaching late, but I'm
Ah,
contemplating retiring. But not, I can't imagine not doing what I'm doing at least a
right.
little bit. And
I'm sure you're the
two
kind
days
of
a week
person who
sounds ideal.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's funny because in the fall, those 2 days a week weren't quite as ample time for me to do different things as they are now because I was actually creating an online class that I'm teaching this spring. I'm teaching a contemporary arranging class, and I had to create the online materials in the fall. So that's something like 20 videos, and on everything that I would be, all the concepts I would teaching. So those days off were actually really valuable. To create the content for the class I'm teaching this spring. And in the summer, I was creating the content for the online class I taught, which was a music technology class in the fall. Now, those are, as far as I know, the only two online classes I'll be teaching for Karen. So now I've got them up and running. It feels like I have a little bit more time to spend on other pursuits during the week.
That's pretty awesome. That does sound great. And so all this throughout this time when changing with the different positions and going to grad school, did you have kids that you raised?
Yes, yeah. So I married my wife actually in grad school, and she was an elementary band director, and so in a sense, I was halfway through my master's degree, so she was supporting me for a year there where I wasn't teaching, and I was just finishing up my master's degree, and then. Uh, we were both working for a while, and then we started a family. I was a high school band director. She was my color guard coordinator for a while, and she'd have my son on strapped on her back while she's teaching the flags, and so
Wow.
she's a fine flutist and has been and a music teacher. We met in college, so it's really nice to have a partner in life who sort of understands what I do. Um, and so yeah, we had ended up having two kids who are both now in their 30s and are both music teachers. I think we made it look too easy or something, or they went into the family business. But my son is a high school choir director in York, near York, Pennsylvania, Central York School District, and my daughter is an elementary general classroom teacher in Whitehall, Pennsylvania. And by the way, she has a very successful YouTube channel, Miss Watson's Music Class, I think she calls it, where she posts a lot of cool stuff. So she kind of picked up that from me, but does a lot of really neat stuff for general music teachers.
I'll have to check that out. I've some of the positions I've looked at possibly doing with the thought of retirement is actually doing like elementary general music because we have some halftime positions in our district
Ah.
that do that, and it scares me, but it's exciting too in some ways.
Yeah, I find it very daunting. Every once in a while, when I was teaching at so in the last, I had been an elementary band teacher, but was coordinating our elementary band and strings department. And so sometimes I'd be in a building working with band, and then the general music teacher would come over, and for one reason or another, would ask me if I could cover their class while they did something, and I would, I'd always happy to help, but I always felt like I was a little out of my comfort zone when I was with general music kids, especially the younger ones, like the kindergarten, first grade. That was like a fish out of water for me.
Well, that when you go even to high school, I'm assuming sometimes, at least in the local area, you're sometimes able to go in as the composer. I know when I've brought in some of our local composers from Colorado, the students are just like they talk about it for months. We got to meet the person who wrote our music.
Yeah, I love that. It feels like being a grandparent because the the host director has done all the real hard work, and you get to come in, and they're always their best behaved, for you, and they sit up a little taller and play a little more attentively, and so you get them at their absolute best. So it's like a dream gig. I'm doing that actually out near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a couple weeks. I'm going out to the Cannon Macmillan school district is premiering a piece that I wrote, and I'm going to work with all levels, elementary, intermediate, and high school. All of their bands for a couple days, and that's going to be a great time. I know. Just they have great teachers. Deanna Grandstaff is the woman who commissioned me and brought me out there, but they're a very highly regarded district, and like I said, I'll sort of get to work with all these kids at their best. So that's wonderful when you get to do that.
That's awesome. That sounds exciting. Hey, recently I was listening to one of your pieces called Aesop's Fables. It's a grade 5 piece,
Yeah,
and the tortoise and the hare is the subtitle, I think. And I could
of the
really
first movement.
picture the first movement. Okay, so
Yeah, it's
that
four
was the only
movements.
movement that I listened to. Then I could picture the story. That was one of my favorite stories. I share that sometimes with students. The At the end of a class or in the middle of class sometimes. Do you have a favorite piece of yours? And if so, what makes it your favorite?
Well, I'll tell you, one time I was interviewing I used to have a podcast, believe it or not. And I was interviewing Robert Sheldon, who Bob was my editor at Alfred for many years. And I remember us talking about what's your favorite piece or whatever. And he said, every piece I've written is it's like a photograph. If you're looking at like pictures, like when you're in high school and then college and early when you first met your wife or whatever, each picture sort of represents where you were at in your life at that time. And that's kind of the way the music is for me. Like when I think of Aesop's Fables, it was my first major commission for like a very fine university wind ensemble. And it was also my first published it wasn't my first high school college kind of level band piece published, but it was the first that Alfred Music published of mine, at that level at least. And Alfred ended up becoming my, for the past dozen years, they've been my major publisher, and I have a real good relationship and partnership with them now. So it's special on a lot of ways, and I actually am very proud of the music. So it's kind of rare that something that I wrote so long ago I still think stands up, and I feel really good about it. I'm actually guest conducting it in April with a wind ensemble in New Jersey, and I've served as narrator. It's for narrator and band, so I've actually, in addition to having conducted many times, I've also served as the narrator for it, and I like it, and I like the fact that each of the four movements gave me a chance to do a little bit of film scoring, to as the narration is read, to have the music represent the drama. And I like that each movement has a moral, a kind of a little nugget of wisdom. So, in a lot of levels, that's probably, of all the pieces I've written, maybe my favorite. I will say more recently, Alfred a while back brought me in to do some writing on their Young Symphonic series, which is goes up to grade 3. Has like a limited instrumentation where you have like, say, trumpet 1 and trumpet 2 instead of 3 trumpet parts. It's only 2 trumpet parts, and only 2 trombone instead of 3, and 2 clarinet instead of 3. So it's kind of like a good middle school band, or an easy read for a high school band. And for whatever reason, I just really took to that series, and some of my best pieces of late, like Terracotta Warriors, is one of my best-selling pieces in their entire catalog, for me at least. I wrote a piece called Extraordinary Machines of Clockwork and Steam a few years ago, and Balkan 7. So all of the things I've written in that Young Symphonic series, I'm very fond of as well, and I kind of like writing at that level.
Those titles sound really cool, and especially early in my teaching career, which seems like it was yesterday, but it was 25 years ago now. Back when we used to get the catalogs and the CDs, the so, sometimes a title would either capture me or like turn me off, and so there were some songs I didn't listen to because they didn't have fascinating titles. And I mean, I never bought a song just because of the title, but it would pull
Right.
me in, and then I'd listen to it. And especially if I could picture what the title was about. And so just some of those ones you just mentioned just capture my imagination right away.
Isn't language cool? I mean, the way you say something like, for instance, Extraordinary Machines of Clockwork and Steam. in the title, I was trying to convey that this is going to be about steampunk. This is going to be about like Jules Verne and, from the Victorian era, what did the future look like, that kind of thing. So you have to think of exactly the right way to phrase that title. And I actually labored over that. And all my titles I labor over. A lot of times I bring my family in to help me. Sometimes it takes me as long to come up with the right title as it does to write the piece.
That's interesting. So I post a lot of videos on sometimes just like a bit of life advice and sometimes music advice. And one of my videos that has gone sort of viral in my own way, it's got about 8 or 10,000 views, I think. Um,
Yeah, that's good.
I wondered if it was the video. My wife said it might have been the title because the title is 4 tips to prevent your saxes from sounding like squawking geese.
No, that's a great title. You're right. I don't know that there's that term clickbait, right? If you have a title that really draws people in, but then you have to have something to back it up, right? So if they read your thing, hopefully, if you got 10,000 hits, chances are people were telling one another about it and sharing it, and it meant something to one person, so they referred it to another. So yeah, but the titles do mean a lot.
So, did you study composition formally, or was it something you just kind of picked up along the way?
Well, as I mentioned, so I went for my master's degree in maybe I didn't mention it, but anyway, I went for my master's degree right after my bachelor's. I didn't go right into teaching, so I took a master's in composition at Temple University. Then I went into teaching, paid back some loans, got married, and started a family. And then after 5 years of teaching, I did go back on a part-time basis. It took me 8 years to get my doctorate, but I have my doctorate in composition from Temple University as well. By that time, I thought I might leave K to 12 for college teaching, and actually, right after I got my doctorate, Temple asked me to come teach theory for them. They had a 1 year non-tenure track job, which I applied for and was offered. So I had to go to my superintendent in the Parkland School District and ask him if I could take a leave of absence. Or actually, I asked for a sabbatical, and he said, no, you'd have to leave the job. But he was such a nice guy. He told me that he would hold my job for me. He said, go do it for the 1 year, and I'll get a 1 year sub for you, and then we want to have you come back after that. And he said, if you end up, staying longer than 1 year, we're going to have to let you go. But that's up to you. But at least for 1 year, he was willing to give me that chance to try that, which was great because it was a great year. I loved working in higher ed, and I loved teaching music theory and composition. But it also sort of cemented in me that I'm really my heart is more K to 12 when it comes to like what I did for decades.
Uh-huh.
Now that I'm teaching at Cairn University, my heart's there. It's a great place to teach, and I love working with these young pre-service teachers. But I think the reason I like it is because I've actually spent so long in K to 12 teaching. Most of my students are music ed majors, and I feel like I can sort of share with them, what's ahead, and help them be prepared. So I kind of like. I'm just glad. I'm not knocking any university music ed professor who didn't teach that long, but I think for me it was the right thing to stay in K to 12 as long as I did. And now, sort of my second act is to sort of help the next generation, but with those decades of experience.
That is really cool, and to have a admin that's that supportive like that is pretty awesome too.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. You teach that long, you're going to have dozens of principals and superintendents and assistant superintendents come and go. And I'd say, like, in all the years I taught in the Parkland School District, maybe only one time did I ever have somebody give me a little pushback. Mostly they were super facilitators and encouraging and supportive of the arts. They might not have understood the arts. That wasn't necessarily their bag, but in many cases they were empowering to me and allowed me to use my gifts. And so I really appreciate the situation I had.
I probably have that. So I'm in my third school, and this has probably been the most supportive admin that I've had, and they've just been great. And through COVID and everything, they kind of
Yeah.
let me do what I'm needed to do, and they said, "You're the expert. You figure it out, and we'll support you however we can."
That's wonderful. And I will say, you tell me if you felt like this was your experience, but I felt like COVID had I mean, as horrible as all that was, the pandemic, and just terrible for kids to have to go through that. I felt so bad for them, but um, there were some silver linings, right? And one of the silver linings I noticed was it really softened the hearts of at administrators. I saw some administrators who went into the pandemic, good people with that they wanted to do a good job, but they're kind of by the book, kind of very serious and sober. But then during the pandemic, it was kind of like the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, where the heart melts and their heart grew tender. I saw some of these administrators just really develop a much more soft heart for kids and their teaching staff, just because of all we had to go through. And I was very proud of them, and it was really neat to see that happen.
I think I saw a lot of that too. A lot sometimes maybe the softening was too much. I know at my school we went through a phase where they're like, "Well, we're not going to punish kids anymore." So actually, the year after COVID
Yeah,
was more difficult because a lot of kids had been used to not doing anything for a year. And
right.
I'm in a Title I school, but this year has been the best year of my 25-year career of teaching.
Yeah, yeah. And I hear what you're saying too. I remember not so much my administrators, but my there were some high school students who after more or less we were more 90% back to normal, let's say, and I just noticed they still had that pandemic state of mind, and I said, you're going to have to start getting in a post-pandemic state of mind here. We got to start. We can't be mediocre the rest of your life. I mean, grace was appropriate for a year and a half or two, but now you're going to go out there and have to get jobs, and you cannot be like, so mediocre. You're going to have to start stepping up and aiming for excellence here. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
get it. Yeah.
I think that's probably talking about the excellence. I think that's probably the best thing that we teach in what we teach. It, even more so than the music, it's that aiming for excellence and the perseverance. Um, I have an unusual situation. I actually have a sixth grade band that just started last month, in addition to the sixth grade band that started at the beginning of the year. And so it's interesting to see the differences in them. But we're at that point now where we've hit the plateau, and it's like, okay, it's going to take extra work to get past this point, and then it's going to be a little bit of coasting again. So they're learning perseverance, and I can see some of them get frustrated, and it's like, no, come on, you push through this. I told you it was coming, and now we just have to push through it, and
Yeah.
they seem to get that.
Dr. Tim Lotzenheiser has a saying that band or any ensemble music is like a school within a school. There's so many life lessons you learn, like you mentioned, perseverance, or you could call it tenacity. And that's in a sense why I started the podcast I started years ago. That I no longer do it, but I did about 40 episodes of this podcast, and I called it "What Music Means to Me." And each episode, I would draw like a life lesson out of what was happening in music. And I think probably of all the life lessons that music teaches is tenacity, sticking to it. It's just hard to be any good at music if you don't, acquire that skill. And I think that's probably the number one attribute that leads a person to be successful, is just not giving up. So I'm really happy that we get to work in a career where a big part of what we do, aside from just helping kids be proficient at music, is teaching them the importance of tenacity and how to stick with stuff.
Amen. Amen. Is that podcast still available out there?
It still is up on the Apple, store or whatever the podcast. It's called "What Music Means to Me," and you can go check out the apps. What I did was some of my favorite episodes. I've been gradually making a video version of them. I don't just take the audio from the podcast. I actually write a new script and produce it. So if you go to my YouTube channel, some of my favorite, like I did an episode on Bach and why I think he's a genius. Well, I did an even cooler version of it on my YouTube channel. So what I've been doing is taking the energy that I was putting into the podcast and just putting it into my YouTube channel. And eventually I'll get all of my favorite podcast episodes. I'll make a YouTube video version of those, but I just haven't had a chance to do that yet.
And what is your YouTube channel?
You know what? I honestly don't know what the name of the channel is. It's just
I
Scott
I
Watson, I
will
think.
I will look it up, and I'll put that in the show notes along with some other ways
Yeah,
to reach you
and
that we'll
please
talk
please
about later.
subscribe. In fact, a lot of the what I did was in the last couple of years, a lot of the like free PDFs and other resources that I used to have available on a separate website. It was like Dr. Watson Music or something like that. And now it's just part of my Scott Watson Music. But most of that is just embedded YouTube videos, many of which I developed during the pandemic when we were sending a lot of content through online. So, like if I had a great warm up sheet, I created a video on how to use that warm up sheet, and then on the YouTube video in the description is where you can click on links to download the free PDFs and all that stuff. So a lot of that is sort of you either get to it through my YouTube channel or through my my website, which is scottwatsonmusic.com.
I think I recently got well, let me get this real quick first. scottwatsonmusic.com.
Hmm.
scottwatsonmusic.com. And that'll be in the show notes for anybody who's listening and driving and can't get that. But I think I was at your YouTube channel recently to download the happy birthday. And I plan on doing
Right.
that as a lesson in a couple of weeks with my middle schoolers, because they're always asking me how do, I have my uncle's birthday is coming up. Can you teach me how to play happy
Exactly.
birthday? And so I
That
appreciate
may be
that
the
resource.
that might be the most requested tune for young band kids is they want to play Happy Birthday for somebody.
So now that we're talking about your resources, you have tons of free resources. I've used a bunch of them. I don't remember exactly when I came upon your resources, but I think it's been in the last 5 years since I've been teaching middle school. And I've
Hmm.
used a bunch of the warm-ups, the happy birthday thing that we just talked about. Tell us a little bit about those and what's the best way to get those, if it's at scottwatsonmusic.com or other locations.
Well, the old saying that necessity is the mother of invention, or a more poetic way of saying that is Beverly Cleary, who's a best-selling children's author, is attributed having said, "If you don't see the book on the shelf that you want, write it." And that's kind of what I did. As a band director, if I didn't find something in our method book or in some of the repertoire that I wanted my students to have, I'd actually just write the warm up, or I'd create the holiday duets, or I'd create the concert band piece that taught what I wanted it to teach. And so a lot of my music, a lot of the music, especially if you take my music at the grade 2 and down and further down level, that's mostly pedagogical stuff that I created either for myself or for clients who commissioned me. But in it is the music teacher in me saying, this will be a great piece to teach the dotted quarter eighth rhythm or something like that. And
Uh-huh.
then the things like, kids love to get into the Halloween spirit. So I wrote a scary melody and created a fun video that goes along with it. And I wrote that for any instrument. And so as kids would ask for stuff, or as I could see like, oh, this is going to motivate some of the kids to practice over the summer, I would just create different content. And I hosted it. Honestly, I've been doing this since the earliest I can remember posting some of this stuff online was 1998. I actually created a website called Home Practice Online. Then later I just called it drwatsonmusic.com. And then more recently, because I kept my pedagogical stuff separate from my composer, stuff. But now I've combined it all on my Scott Watson Music, which is my composer site. But I just have it up there in an area for young band. So if you just go to scottwatsonmusic.com and look at the young band tab, you'll find a lot of that, all of that stuff. So, and like I'll give you an example of a niche thing, but this is how, dozens of these free resources all came about because somebody asked for it. So there was a time when a kid who was in Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts or something, when he wanted to get his music merit badge, and he had to play taps, but the key that he found it online was too high. It's like the older key. So I created a younger band version, a key that would work where they just have to hold down 1 and 3 and play. So there's like, that would be an example of something that's there, is just taps for young band, things like that.
I'm going to give you credit for this, even though I'm not sure if I got this idea from you or not. But I sort of did something similar because one of my students, I like to sneak up on kids at school when I have my saxophone out and play "Careless Whisper" or something. And so a student last year, he said, "Mr. Vine, can you like write that out for me?" And so I told him I would, and I figured if I write it out for him, I might as well do it in all the keys and put it in a video, and so I did that, and so on my music website, that I find that to be one of the ones that's downloaded the most. How to play
Right, right.
Careless Whisper.
Well, and so that's one thing that maybe makes my area of my website a little different is I haven't tried to dip my toe into the pool of protected music. I just decided it would. There's people like yourself and like Stephen Selfridge would be an example. Dr. Selfridge has a YouTube channel that has a lot of. He'll take like maybe just a 12 measure excerpt, but the main theme of a lot of pop tunes. And I don't know. I honestly haven't asked him how he deals with all the, like knowing that that's protected music and that there's copyright issues or whatever. But there's people, he has literally several 100,000 subscribers to his channel, which is like for a music ed channel, that is like off the charts amazing because
Wow.
he's offering
Wow.
stuff that, and my own students, I would point them right at it, and my kids would come in, and in addition to working on the lesson that I asked them to work, they'd say, "Hey, and in addition to that, I learned how to play this tune from Dr. Selfridge's website." So more power, and I hope YouTube allows people to do that. But I just decided, knowing as a composer how protecting music is a little tricky, I just decided all my stuff is public domain, free, fair use kind of stuff.
Well, you know how I got around it. So I do a demo, and the demo is allowed because I think YouTube automatically recognizes the copyright and
Uh huh.
somehow pays the composer. I know for me, I have some arrangements of songs that I've attached to videos, and I earn about $1.50 a month, I think,
Yeah.
from those when they're played. So, and then for the music that I gave for the kids, it was just like all whole notes. So it's like these are the notes that you'll use in the song,
Ah, yeah.
but I didn't write out the rhythms or anything. It's just they have to play along with the video and do some things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, it's funny on a YouTube channel, especially if it's monetized, and mine is. Um, if somebody feels that you're using their content, they can actually give you a notice, a copyright notice, and then you can appeal it if you have a good reason to use it. So, for instance, recently I got a copyright notice about using some music that I actually wrote, my own music, and so obviously I contested. I said I can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that I wrote this in 2003, and I have the finale score and blah blah blah. And then the person can decide not to push it, which they of course chose not to push it because they know it's a losing cause in that case. But it just cracks me up how, like, my guess is there are people out there who are just claiming copyright for all sorts of stuff, assuming that maybe 10% of the people won't challenge it, and if they just keep the money from 10%, they'll be in good shape.
Wow, that's crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy. I think I've had some. So I usually do my songs through CD Baby, and
Uh
then
huh.
CD Baby handles all the copyright collections. So then even when I use my own song on my YouTube channel, YouTube will say the copyright is
Oh,
owned
right.
by
Uh huh.
whatever. But I figure the money's coming to me anyway. And
Yeah.
that $1.50 is coming to me anyway, so it's just going to come
Right.
through CD Baby.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
think
Do
in
you
another
have
life,
any? Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think in another life, I could be happy involved in intellectual property. I just think that's a fascinating field, and being a composer, I've had to come up against that, and in some media, but it just seems like a cool. I think that if I wasn't teaching music, I'd probably pursue something that had to do with like being a music supervisor for a studio, or being a permissions director for a publisher or something like that.
Sounds like a lot of tedious work to me. Hey, do you have some last minute advice for us? And maybe if you could just remind us of how some of the ways we can reach you. We've got scottwatsonmusic.com. And maybe if you can just cap the interview.
Okay, sure. Well, I'll tell you what. I just recently spoke at a conference where the topic I chose to speak on was teamwork, and but not teamwork for our students, although that's so important. We teach our kids that band is like a team, that kind of stuff. But the teamwork that I was talking about at this place I was speaking had to do with in your department. So I'll just close by saying that I think, especially over the last couple of years, but even if you take the last decade with social media's rise and just sort of the way that the dynamics of contemporary life have affected people, people feel more isolated than they ever have. They feel more alone in the world. Even though they might have, 2,000 Facebook friends, they don't even have one really good close friend. So I would say to just be really to take every opportunity to reach out and have actual relationships with the people in your department. And I think those relationships make it fun to go to work every day. If you're going to last 36 years in a career, you're not going to be able to do it as a lone ranger. And especially for young teachers, I think I know I felt very vulnerable, and I didn't want to admit when I was a young teacher that I didn't know how to control a room of 100 kids with noisemakers in their hands. But I sure wish I would have been. I wish I would have been had the perspective I have now, that there's all these seasoned mentor teachers. I could have tapped their expertise and said, "Hey, could you come watch me teach and show me how to, how I can have better classroom management or whatever, or show me how I can get these clarinets to get over the break better or whatever." And that's being willing to be in a relationship with somebody else and say, show me. Or maybe the older teacher being willing to take some time to show the younger teacher. And maybe at first the younger teacher is going to feel vulnerable, so they'll say no, but you keep asking them, "You sure you don't want me to come over and help you with that rehearsal or whatever?" So the big push of what I talked about recently, and what I'm choosing to close our interview with, is I just think relationships are so important in every aspect of life, and especially in education. It can make your job more fun, and it can make you better at your job.
That is awesome advice and very much needed. And Scott, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, you bet. It's been an honor. Thanks, James, for having me.
The Music Ed Podcast, where you get quick and easy tips for how to be a better band teacher.